Hey everybody, Max Boltman here alongside the Athletics' Corey Proman and Scott Wheeler for another episode of the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series. I know we're not on our usual day this week, but it's for a good reason. The NHL Draft Combine was last week, and Scott and Corey, you guys were both there in Buffalo. Corey, let's start with this. Let's start broad. What did you learn over 4 or 5 days in Buffalo?
Well, other than I didn't learn this Buffalo, but I learned that Scott looks very dapper today.
That's right.
I got a wedding to get to here. We're recording between the ceremony this morning and the party tonight. So,
But at the combine, I think everyone's main interest is the top couple of picks, and mainly how is this draft going to go? And I don't think I can answer that today as we record this on June 7th precisely. But talking to a lot of people there, kind of getting a general sense of how people think it's going to go. I think talking to a lot of scouts, executives, agents, I think most people expect the top 4 picks in some order to be the 2 dynamic wingers, Gavin McKenna and Ivar Stenberg, the center Caleb Malhotra from Brantford, and defenseman Chase Reid from the Sioux. Can't guarantee what order those top 4 are going to go in, obviously, but that seems to be the emerging consensus, is those are the 4 players. So who's going to take who? I think Toronto likes all 4 of those players and has done a lot of homework on all 4 of those players. I think, though, almost everybody I talk to in Buffalo believes they will take McKenna with the first pick. Then we get to San Jose at 2. Who are they going to take? Will they take Stenberg? Will they take a defenseman? I think most people do expect them to take a defenseman. I think most expect that defenseman to be Reid. I don't think that's settled. I think they're doing a lot of work on Carson Karls. I think they're doing a lot of work on Keaton Verhoff. And on Stenberg, I don't think that's settled, but I think most expect, just like we did in that scout exec mock, to be 1-2, McKenna, then Reid. Does feel like Malhotra to Vancouver is a thing. I don't know if that's a done deal, but it feels like it's moving in that direction. And then I think Chicago would take whichever of those 4 players are left.
Even the D.
Whether it's, I think in the eyes of a lot of teams, Chase Reid separated himself a little bit from the rest of those D, and I think they would probably still do that because he's the clear best player available at 4. Then we get past 4. I feel like that's been kind of the chalk 4 that has emerged in a lot of our conversations. I feel like every mock draft I see has some variation of those 4 players going in the top 4. So I think a lot of people are wondering, okay, what about the Rangers? What about Calgary? What about Winnipeg and Seattle and Florida? I think then 6 to 10, again, variation of this. I think we're probably going to see a run of defensemen. I think you're going to see Carson Karls, Albert Smits, Keaton Verhoff, Malte Gustafsson kind of go very quickly in that second half of the lottery range. It does feel like Viggo Bjork, the center from Djurgården, has worked his way into that conversation too. I think he's in the conversation with a lot of those teams picking in that 6 to 12 range right now. It does feel like of that next group of defensemen after Reid, it does feel like Karls has the most love in the league right now. So if I was handicapping who's the most likely to go first, i.e. to the Rangers, I think it would be Karls. But I feel like there's still a lot of conversations to be had. And the fact that Karls had to skip testing, I believe it was due to some lingering concussion symptoms. I think that's stuff that people are going to look into. I don't believe it's believed to be that serious, but it's that these are all just kind of minor conversations happening in the coming days towards the draft.
I don't think, from everything I heard this week, I don't think Karls gets past 5-6. And I think there's a chance that he goes 2 or 4. I think San Jose and Chicago are both strongly considering Carson.
All right, lot to unpack there here. The thing that stood out to me most, Corey, was you saying, it's this group of 4 and the only defenseman in that obviously being Reid. I feel like we've talked about it as a cluster. I know you've had Reid ranked as your top player. You mentioned some separation, though. Where do you think that separation is coming from with Chase Reid, from this cluster of defensemen who we've kind of talked about intertwined all cycle?
I feel like with Reid, you look at him and he has no clear issue in his game. and he checks every box. I feel like with Verhoff and Smits, some teams are going to have questions on the offense. I feel like with Rudolph, you're going to have questions on how competitive he is and how good a defender he is. Same thing with Gustafson. I think you're going to have some minor questions on the offense there. Carls as well, I don't think is a premier puck mover despite his great production this season. But at least the offense is good enough that I think he's emerged into the conversation with Reid. But I think with Reid, you get a guy who's being measured at the combine as 6'2.5", great skater, great puck mover, great all-around player. I mean, he looks like the kind of defenseman that goes 1, 2, 3. Like that's the kind of prospect he is.
I'll say too, he was one of the guys, and we can get to some of the interviews and guys who stood out. Reid worked the room this week. Like he was someone I heard from multiple teams was very, very impressive in the interview process.
So let's go to that. I mean, that's a big part of what this kind of week is, the 4 or 5 days. Teams aren't really using this to assess prospects on their athleticism so much as they want to get to know them and they want to see how guys react. We see all the silly exercises and questions teams ask leak out, Scott, but who do you think kind of helped themselves, and did anyone hurt themselves in that process this week?
I got mixed reports when I started asking that question around to a handful of scouts who I know sort of interviewed the top guys in the top range. The one guy that I got mixed reports back on in terms of the interview process was Smits. He's a pretty unique kid. We've spoken to him over the course of this year, dating back to the World Juniors. He's got a bit of I don't want to say arrogance to him, but there's a bit of a sort of cockiness to him, if you will. And I heard from multiple teams that he did not do as well in interviews as Carls did, as Reid did, as those other D did. All of those kids are very, very impressive, and I think Smits isn't for everybody. Like he's going to rub some people the wrong way. So he was one of the guys amongst the. There were others that I heard sort of struggled in interviews. Samu Aladari was a guy who there are people who have sort of pretty significant concerns about his fitness level and his weight, and there were others that sort of didn't do well. But Smits was a guy who I had a couple of people text me like, I don't know if I like this kid, kind of thing.
I feel like I have typically found when guys have elite compete, they tend to be the kind of high character players that people gravitate towards. And thus, it doesn't really surprise me that both Carson Carls and Viggo Bjork, I heard, interviewed very well with teams. I think Bjork in particular, I think there was a lot of interest in him. And I think he's another guy, there was a lot of positive things coming out about him throughout the interview process after a very strong end to the season. On the other front, I think Tynan Lawrence got challenged pretty significantly on how his season went, on his decision to leave junior and go to college, and how poorly it went. I think there was some difficult interviews, was my understanding. Doesn't mean I don't think that he's not sliding, but I think he had to deal with some adversity this season, and I think there were some hard questions asked of him about his decision-making process and ultimately why he struggled so much at the college level.
And when we talk about some of these interviews, the direct tie, Scott, is about rising and falling. Like, who are the guys who you think, whether it's based on the interviews or whether it's only just kind of coming out via the combine, of guys who are going to go a little higher than maybe we've talked about them, guys who are going to go a little bit lower than we've talked about them?
Less on the combine, but Maxim Sokolovsky, the 6'7", nearly 240 pounds was his listing. Defenseman with the London Knights was a hot topic for just about every team at the combine and a real focal point for a lot of teams. I think Sokolovsky goes first round, and that's saying a lot for a kid who just played his first year of high-level hockey in the OHL, who struggled, especially in the first half of the season in the OHL, but who has a very unique package in that we saw him around the hotel a few times. He's a mutant. Like, he is an impressive sort of physical specimen. And on top of that, he can skate, and he came along really quickly, and he finished really strong. And I think that was important. Corey and I had some conversations with people at U18 Worlds as well. So this is a conversation that has been happening for a little while here. But I think Sokolovsky's going to go like early 20s here and be that sort of rising D. So he was one that sort of is on everybody's mind. There were two wingers that we've talked about over the course of the season to varying degrees, who I think were kind of on the bubble of the first round, sort of early day two guys that did really well in testing that caught my eye. Nicholas Aram-Olsen, the Norwegian winger, and Mathis Preston of the Vancouver Giants both did really, really, really well in testing. Not that can move the needle in any significant way, but I do think if you were a team that was comfortable taking one of those kids in the first round, you're probably a little bit more comfortable taking a Preston or an Aram-Olsen in the first round coming out of it, just because of how athletic they looked in sort of the quick twitch, the agility stuff, the vertical jump, all of that stuff. Like, these kids are natural, impressive athletes.
Not everyone did all the testing. I mean, Carson Karls, I don't think participated in the testing. Marcus Ruck, I think he was injured during it or had to tweak something during it.
Yeah, and anytime you hear the word back, I think you get a little bit worried after what we've seen with the Combine over the last few years. Liam said that Marcus had been dealing with a back injury prior, and then in the horizontal jump tweak something. We saw him coming off, and when he was walking through, like, he actually looked like he was visibly uncomfortable and in pain after it happened. That is not a good sign for a kid who needs to spend this summer in the gym. Like, I do think that really matters. It's been a huge talking point with them, how little muscle those two guys have and how important it was going to be for them to get an uninterrupted summer in the gym to get stronger. And now that may be in a little bit of jeopardy here for Marcus. Obviously, Liam's fine. But there's a little bit of that happening. Like, Belchez didn't participate in a couple of the tests, the heavy weightlifting tests, because of his clavicle. It sounds like he's getting close, but he didn't participate in some of the testing. Xavier Villeneuve absolutely crushed the testing that he did participate in, but didn't participate in a couple of the events because of his hips, which have been bothering him all year. So there's some guys who have some injury issues here heading into the draft that teams are going to be factoring into their decision making.
There's also Corey. I mean, and when I've been there with you in the past, I know you spend a lot of time right at that first station, double checking things. It's a good place to watch from. That's where everyone weighs in and measures. Sometimes these measurements, these final measurements can, that half inch, make fun of it or not, it can matter to teams.
Yeah, a couple that caught my eye, Malte Gustafsson coming in at 6'4.5". That's a guy. So I think we thought in the year he was closer to 6'4". Now he's at 6'4.5". Can he get to 6'5"? I think that's something when you look at the way he skates too. Like, I think that's really intriguing for teams. Picking high in the draft. Wyatt Cullen's official measurement comes in at 6'1". That's a guy who forgot the exact measurement he came into the program at, but I think he was measured at 5'8", 5'5". Yeah. So his official measurement coming in at 6'1", very notable. There's a couple of guys who we never got official measurements for all season. Usually these are guys who are playing pro hockey who don't have. So NHL Central Scouting will do these measurements at major international events like the U18s and the Holinka, at their showcase events like the OHL Top Prospects Game or the CHL NTDP Prospects Game. So we were waiting for official measurements on Gavin McKenna, on Ivar Stenberg, on Viggo Bjork. We didn't get one for Stenberg, at least not yet to my knowledge, because he didn't start participating in testing because he was sick. McKenna came in at 5'11.25". Viggo Bjork 5'9" on the dot. So there was no major variations there from what we kind of expected. Ilya Morozov 6'3.25" too, which I think is what we kind of expected beforehand too. No major changes there. Probably one guy who kind of came down a little bit, which may hurt his draft stock, is Tommy Blyle, who we thought was, when he was last measured by Central, was at 5'11.75". His official measurement here is 5'11.25". So that 6'0" moves to 5'11". It's not the end of the world.
Villy was also visibly disappointed when he came in at 5'10.75".
So, these are things that I think can be of secondary importance. You're talking about late first versus earlier mid-second kind of thing.
Yeah.
Plant and Valentini, both importantly going from 5'9" to 5'10", if I recall correctly.
They're like mid-round picks, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it matters, though. I mean, it matters for all these guys. And I people can joke about, Chris had the line, put away the tape measure, a couple years ago, but these things can matter. And, Bjork was, I think, the one that I was the most curious to see. Could it be 5'9.5", and you could call him 5'10"? ultimately, it's to your point, Corey. Like for the guys who are really this good, they're going to go really high. But they're little details that matter. Scott, one other thing I want to talk about is becoming more and more of a part of the combine beat, and that is figuring out where some of these guys are going to play next season. The big news out of the week was Daxon Rudolph and his college commitment to Denver. But what else did you learn this week about the college commitments? Any other player movement considerations that could come for next season?
Yeah, I had a list of like 10 guys I wanted to pull at some point over the course of the week, whether it was at the hotel or on testing day, just to get them one-on-one and get a concrete answer on some of their decision-making for next year. The Rucks have made the decision after touring between the end of Medicine Hat season and the Combine. After touring some colleges, the Rucks have made the decision to return to Medicine Hat. Mathis Preston also briefly considered college, but is going to return to the WHL. The week started with Daxon Rudolph sort of confirming his commitment to the University of Denver. I grabbed Seamus Ignatavicius because I was curious on his status in the NL. Ignatavicius is obviously a pretty unique story out of Lithuania, potential sort of more likely early day 2 guy, but wouldn't shock me if he was a late first. He still has one more year on his NL contract, but he sort of made it clear to me that he has an option, that he has an out in that contract, and that he's going to discuss with whichever team drafts him whether he should come to North America. I asked Marcus Nordmark the same thing. He is obviously an import pick of the London Knights. Nordmark has told me he has 2 years left on his contract with Djurgården, but that he has told Djurgården and was telling teams in the interview process this week that if he's not in a top 9 role on the SHL team, that he will likely try to work something out with them so that he can go play in London at some point next year. He is going to start the year in Djurgården. Novotny seemed cagey on it, but I got the sense from Adam Novotny that going back to Peterborough isn't in the plans. And then the last big one was Blyle, who I know MSU tried to get in for next year and have left a spot open for, hoping that he would come. There were some teams, when we talked about the interviews, I probably should have mentioned him. There were some teams I heard that were pretty critical of Tommy's decision to go back, and he held strong. He wants to go back to Moncton next year. They came up short of winning a QMJHL title. I think he probably feels that with Chase Reid coming into MSU that he doesn't have the opportunity that he was looking for. So Blyle, against some of the advice of some NHL clubs who would have liked to see him take the step and play college hockey next year, Blyle seems pretty firm on going back to Moncton. So that's going to become an increasing story with a lot of these kids. They've got big decisions to make here.
Not one of the players that eligible this year, but just talking to people around hockey, it does feel like Landon DuPont's commitment is down to Michigan. It will be down to Michigan or Michigan State, likely, and I think most people are betting on Michigan being the one who will be able to put together the most attractive offer for him in terms of NIL money, ice time, etc.
I think it's going to be Michigan.
All right, so that's the Combine. Were you guys able to catch any of the Stanley Cup Final Saturday night? I know you were traveling back, obviously, but it was quite the game if you were able to see any of it, Corey.
I was actually at the airport for the duration of it, between some delayed flights.
I arrived at home and pulled up my phone, and Marner had just scored the hat trick, and then I went and tucked the kids into bed and gave them a kiss goodnight, and I came back and they'd scored 3 of the 4 goals to sort of mount the comeback. So I really started watching at 4-3 and finished it out from there.
Yeah, well, if you went up to tuck the kids to bed, those 3 goals could have all been scored in the time just getting them up the stairs. It was a ridiculously fast flurry for a comeback for the Carolina Hurricanes. It's been amazing.
Yeah, I really impressed by the level of talent on both teams. Like I know there's, some of those goals were lucky, and some of them were high skill plays. Some of those, the challenge goals and whatnot. But just watching the games, just really impressed by the level of tenacity on both of those teams, the level of the pace, the skill. Like these are, I know Vegas didn't have the best regular season, but their underlying numbers were strong. And I feel like when they have their whole group on the ice, like these are 2 elite teams, deep teams with high end talent. And it's, I think this is, a very deserving Stanley Cup final, and seeing, some of the best hockey players in the world going at it. One question for you guys, I don't vote on the awards, I know you do. Why does Jordan Staal not get more love when it comes to the major awards? Because just watching him in these playoffs, like I know his offensive numbers are not great, but man, like he's every time I've watched him in these playoffs, he's a difference maker. Like he's one of their best players, and it feels like he deserves to be in these sulky conversations. And I know he doesn't have the points, but like he's just been awesome.
Scott, why don't you go ahead first? I'm trying to pull up some of my old ballots, see if I've
Yeah,
got any Jordan Staal on there.
He's been on my ballot over the years. He was not in my top 5 this year, but he was among the 8 or 9 guys that I considered for my ballot this year and has been on my ballot before. I think part of the problem he faces is that despite it being a defensive award, I think a lot of people weigh fairly or unfairly weigh sort of the ability to do it at both ends. And so you get the premium offensive guys who also check. You get the Suzukis and the Kopitars over the years, and Bergeron and Datsuk and those guys who are also like that 70-point player that Staal has just never risen to.
Yeah, it looks like I had him third in 2024 and second in 2023, Corey. So I think I'm on the same page with you there. But I do agree. I think as he's gotten older into his career, maybe it's gotten a little easier to overlook him. I also think the Carolina system, we talked about this last year with some of the Edmonton guys, and it can be hard to know what to do with the Bouchards and the Nugent Hopkins because you know the structure that they're kind of operating within. And I think Carolina's guys can, fair or unfair, fall victim to that because we know it's such a good defensive overall picture there.
I think it's the same challenge that Sam Reinhart faces playing with Barkov too. Like people are just reluctant to give Sam Reinhart more credit.
I guess I just feel like they're the best possession team in the league. He gets all the tough matchups. He's on he's on the top power play unit right now too. Like there's just like I said, I'm not a Carolina expert. I don't have deep dived on Jordan Staal in a very long time. But just watching him in these playoffs, to me, he's been one of the 5 to 10 most impactful players consistently throughout this entire postseason.
I agree with you. Like I said, he's been in my top 3 2 of the last 4 years. So he's a force, and there's a ton of the best defensive forwards in the world in this series, and I think there's a lesson in that as well, right? I mean, Mark Stone is in this series, Jack Eichel is in this series, Jordan Staal is in this series, Mitch Marner is in this series, and Mitch Marner is not just doing it with the defensive end. I mean, all the production that everyone always wanted in Toronto, it's coming out all at once like a fire hydrant, Scott, right now.
Yeah, honestly, and one of my big takeaways from this series, and Corey kind of alluded to it with the talk of the skill plays off the top, but this series, for all the talk of playoff hockey and the way the game changes, this series has not been really played in the mud. Like it hasn't been that violent, bitter. It's been physical, but it hasn't been that sort of violent, bitter hockey. Like they're out there making plays, they're relentless, but I wouldn't call this sort of the typical series that we see at the end. And that speaks to the lead changes and some of the skill plays that we've seen made. But these teams their rosters are built 4 lines deep. Like there are guys, look at what Brett Howden's done. Look at what that sort of Stankoven line has done. There are players up and down Dorofeyev. Like there are players up and down these lineups who can make skill plays. It's not just the stars anymore that have to carry that load while everybody else mucks it up.
I mean, also one thing is just Brayden McNabb, like
warrior,
standing ovation for what he did last night, like unbelievable.
And for him to have a key play on one of the Marner goals, too, you're never going to expect Brayden McNabb to be making a big offensive play in the game. But if there was ever a moment for it to come out, that's a pretty darn good one.
And I know talking to people at the Combine, they connected the dots from McNabb to Malte Gustafsson. If you wanted to just insert some draft talk into this conversation.
Are you taking McNabb top 10, though? I mean, he's a great player.
He's two wins away from 2 Stanley Cups.
That's fair. That's fair. Not the only guy in the blue line. I get your point, though. And I think Gustafsson has a higher ceiling than Brayden McNabb personally. Yeah. But it is a good tie-in. Let's put a pin in that right there. Take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about, Corey, an article that you had come out, the Scout Confidential, which I think dovetails really nicely with all this Combine stuff. Be right back. All right, we are back. And Corey, every year you put out one of my favorite articles to read in draft season, the Scout and Exec Confidential, with a lot of anonymous quotes from decision makers in the hockey world. And I think let's start at the very top with Gavin McKenna, because some of these quotes I think are very interesting. One of the quotes here that I found interesting from a scout: when things get tough, if that's the guy you're leaning on in the playoffs, our guys would be so excited to play against him. I would take Stenberg, Reid, and Malhotra ahead of him. But you contrast that with other quotes, right? And this other scouting director says, I get the concerns, but there is a realistic chance he's Patrick Kane or Nikita Kucherov. His brain and hands are that special. It is hard to kind of square those two things, and yet that is the picture when you talk about Gavin McKenna.
Right. I feel like the debate with him has always been never been that the skill or the hockey sense has been debated, that the special offensive talent has been debated. I'll put it, as how one guy told me at the combine. It comes down to the player evaluation and the exact level of player you think you're getting. There's levels of ratings between Marner, Panarin, Kane, and Kucherov, and or something, below that. It's and that's really like maybe something closer like Lucas Raymond or something like that. Like that's really the debate. And figuring out exactly what you're getting and what the realistic outcome for him is really defines the debate I want and the debate around McKenna and ultimately what Toronto or anyone else decides to do with him.
Ironically enough, Lucas Raymond is the comp that Ivar Stenberg now uses for himself after he was using Tim Stützle earlier in the year. So if we're talking about a floor for Gavin McKenna of Ivar Stenberg or of Lucas Raymond, and that's the player that Ivar Stenberg is using for himself, then I think you can potentially still come to the conclusion that Gavin McKenna is the better prospect.
Well, your word to the floor is Alexis Lafreniere more than anything else kind of thing. But I get what you're saying.
I don't view that as the floor, but
is there not like some overlap though? The same age, like you look at the dominance that Lafreniere had, the World Juniors at his age, dominance. He didn't play college, obviously. I think McKenna's ahead at the same age, but I think you can look back and the late birth dates, the not super athletic profile, and like you could connect the dots there a little bit.
McKenna was 15, 20 points more productive last year than Stenberg was at the same age in a lesser junior league.
I'm not talking about Raymond. I'm not talking about Stenberg though. I'm talking about
Lafreniere.
McKenna. Yeah. I think he's ahead, but it doesn't like. I think you can suggest.
I just think he's way more
reasonably close to the same age.
Yeah, I don't.
The sense would be a different level, right? I mean, you might actually
even just the feel on the puck.
But...
Yeah, Laf was bigger and heavier, and
I feel like there's some revisionist history going on here. I think we can go back to what we said about Lafreniere within the word game breaker, elite stick skill, elite offensive creativity. Like that was the scouting report on Lafreniere coming out of junior.
I don't.
It's hard. It's hard to go back.
I don't know that I described him that way, but
I thought too, though, like you guys mentioned Stenberg, and there was a scout quote here on Stenberg that I think was interesting. People talk about this guy like he's a slam dunk to go 1 or 2. It reminds me of William Eklund's hype. He was in everyone's top 5, then he goes 7. When teams get to meetings and they describe a smaller winger who isn't dynamic to their GMs, he will start moving down lists. Now, I think we would all put Ivar Stenberg above William Eklund, but that characterization, Corey, I think is why... when we talk about this, we've talked a lot about Ivar Stenberg being available at 4 to the Chicago Blackhawks. And there's been a lot of pushback that's like, no, this guy's going to go 2. Why would San Jose pass on him? Why would Vancouver pass on him? That's the answer to the question, even if it is about size and positionality a little bit.
Yeah, I think when teams are debating McKenna, I feel like everybody can rationalize, even if they don't all agree or they don't love the player type, could see a path for him to be like 100-point scorer, to be a leading scorer in the league, to be a dominant offensive player. I think with Stenberg, there is some real fears here. You're drafting like a 60 to 80 point guy. And not that that's not still a really good player, especially with how competitive he is. But if you have the bullet at 1-1, is that really what you want? If you have it at 1-2, do you want a 5'11", 70-point winger? Would you rather get like a big minutes defenseman or a big minutes center? Now, the people who love Stenberg might say he can be 80 to 85, while providing, tilting the ice, being a playoff type caliber player. But I think that's the debate on him right now. Is like, given he is not that McKenna dynamo with the puck, and he's not super athletic, he's not huge, he's not a blazer. Like you're really just betting that this compete level in his game is just so good that he's gonna, become the first or second best player in the draft. I think that's, for some people, it's a big bet.
I am a little surprised when we constantly hear Stenberg discussed as if he's small. Like, he's 185 pounds and 5'11" at 18 years old. There are tons of players playing in the 180s in the NHL that are stars on their team. There are players playing in the 170s in the NHL that are stars on their team. Like, I do not, and the way he plays, the way he gets up and under sticks, I do not view Stenberg. There are other things I think you could look to in terms of pure upside, but I do not view his size as at all an issue, nor the way he plays.
Is it fair to say though, like there's a difference in talking about being one of the stars on your team and picking someone one, or like if you're picking someone one or two, you expect them to be your best player within a number of years. Oh,
Yeah.
period. Like not one of your best players, your best player.
And I think if Stenberg's a 70 or 80 point winger, that's still that's probably is one of your best players. The question is, can you build a championship team around that? Like I think that's the debate. Or would you rather pick a 22-minute net defenseman who's at the 40 to 50 point range, but plays penalty kill, power play, heavy even strength, like or a center like Malhotra, who probably projects to be that 18, 19-minute a night centerman, power play, penalty kill, etc. I think that's where the stress points really come in.
We're currently watching a team in the Stanley Cup Finals in Carolina that is built around a bunch of 60 to 80 point players.
And a bunch of 40 point really good two-way defensemen, right? Like, and that's so it's which one is driving that bus. I think that's the question teams are going to keep coming back to.
Yeah, I would probably say that I know they haven't been their best players in the playoffs, but I mean Aho, Jarvis, Slavin, Miller to me are their best players.
And there's a little bit of both flavors here. So
yeah.
like if you're a team, it's which do you give the credit to? Are you giving it more to the Slavins and the Millers? Or are you giving it more to the Aho, Stankoven, Jarvis types?
I know we didn't talk about this when we were doing the Jordan Stahl thing earlier, but Keandre Miller, man, like,
yep,
he's
been
got to
outstanding.
Like, he's probably doing what Seth Jones did for himself last spring, where I know we're not in an international cycle now, but I feel like if there was a international tournament coming up in 6 months, he'd be in the Team USA conversation right now.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the D on this class, Corey. And its opinions are kind of all over the place. And we could probably do this with each individual player. I want to focus on a guy that I don't even think we've really talked about enough, and that's Albert Smits. Just to give people a sense for the range here. And Corey, I'm sorry that I'm reading so many of these quotes. I do want everyone to go read this article. I promise you I'm getting to less than 10% of the stuff that's in here. There's one executive saying, I think McKenna goes 1 and the conversation for Smits starts at 2. So that high up. Another scout, I have Smits at 1, reminds me of Moritz Seider. But then there's the detractors, right? There's scouting directors questioning the hockey IQ, kind of throwing Sam Dickinson around, which is a good player, but more toward the back of the top 10. And executive, I don't see the hype with Smits. He's a good player, but he's vanilla with the puck. Like, this is how you get these kind of dramatic results on draft day, Corey, is that you have some teams that have reservations and maybe are pegging a guy around 8 or 9, and maybe that's where the public sees him. But if you have one team that believes this guy's Moritz Seider, and that team picks in the right spot, it can be a very different result when the time comes.
Yeah, and only so much I can say on that front. But this is a draft, and I kind of hinted at the top of the article, talking to people that say they see this as a draft as a group. There's not big drop-offs. There's a group of 7 players for some, a group of 9 players for some that are all really close. This was kind of similar to how the 23 draft would have gone, minus Celebrini, that if the draft order had been slightly different, I think we would have seen significantly different results in how that 2 to 8 would have gone in 23. And in this year's draft, if the draft order had been slightly different, I think we'd be talking about different names in the top 4, in the top 2, in the top 5, based on people's preferences. I'm not hearing Smits as much with the teams with the high picks currently, but if the draft order had gone differently, there's a chance we would be hearing his name more. We've been hearing Verhoff's name more, hearing Daxon Rudolph's name more. It's that is kind of how some people in the league view this crop of defensemen, and there is very much significantly different preferences.
One other guy I wanted to ask you about from this, and you alluded to him in segment 1, is Tynan Lawrence. And for a guy who we at one point were talking about at the very upper part of this class, what do you think the odds are that Tynan Lawrence goes top 10 this year?
50-50, I would guess, in that the strong play of Viggo Bjork and the year in the SHL and at the World Championships, I think will appeal to those who are really eyeing a center high in the draft, as teams tend to eye centers and defensemen primarily. So I think he's worked his way into that top group that I feel like people can feel more comfortable with a center like him high. Still very reasonable that 3 centers go in the top 10, and then Lawrence would be in that conversation. But I feel like the way he ended his year, he actually was quite good towards the end of the year in college. But his overall
last two
second
games,
half,
his last 2 games were excellent.
yeah, like he was their BU's best player by a significant margin, I thought. But then his U18s was fine, not great. I think probably puts him more like 10 to 15, I think, if I was doing a mock draft today.
Yeah, coincidentally, you said 10 max, and I wonder specifically at about 11 with St. Louis.
Well, it's interesting. He's another guy where you look at these quotes, Corey, and you can really see guys who really feel like, oh, you're overthinking this. Don't throw away everything from the early part of the season, from his underage year, just because of what happened in a couple months span in college. But then you have other people who I think are just pointing out, some of these flaws in the vision. Does he see it well enough? Is he making enough happen?
Well, yeah, I've seen the chirps. I've gotten the chirps on from text, and I'm sure fans have chirped me like, you had this guy, really high at one point. How is he all the way at 16? Like, did that much change? And I'm like, well, people don't realize this, but that happens with other players too. Like,
yep.
Rubric, I had top 5 at one point. He's like in the 80s and the 90s. There's plenty of other players this year that I've dropped significantly or raised significantly. We weren't talking about Malhotra, and 6 to 9 months ago. Even if the information isn't 50 games worth of new information, we don't usually get that much sometimes. So you do what you can with the information you get, and it wasn't just a handful of college games. It was he played pretty much every game for BU in the second half, and he played U18s, and he played Holinka, all of which didn't leave a great taste in my mouth. And so I think that's you got to assess the whole body of work.
A lot of good stuff in that one. I would highly encourage everyone to go read Corey's 2026 NHL Draft Confidential. Let's take a quick break right there. We'll come back. Be right back. All right, we are back. Now I'm going to spend the last few minutes of the show today talking about some NHL news, not typically mainly our wheelhouse, although we did talk Cup Final a little bit earlier. But I want to talk about Dylan Larkin because I think it dovetails a lot with some of these prospect conversations now.
Yeah, and Max, you and I had a piece go up today talking about what a potential trade packages can look like for Larkin. It's always tough to construct these because there's never a perfect comp, but we looked at, past, highly thought of centers that were traded in recent years, Ryan O'Reilly, Jack Eichel, to get some inspiration for what packages could look like. Before we get to that, just to start, if you had to handicap a percentage that Dylan Larkin's Detroit Red Wing on September 16th, what would you put the percentage at right now?
I would say like less than 20%, but it's not 0. And I think people are taking it like it's 0. I'm not saying that it is, exactly 20, but I'm trying to ballpark here. Like it's a non-zero chance. And I think the way I've put it in a story is I would imagine that's inversely proportional to the size of the list that he gives the Red Wings to work from. Pierre LeBrun has reported that right now it's a short list. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of wiggle room within that, right? Like I think there's a big difference between Dylan Larkin saying, hey, there's 4 teams I'd go to, there's 6 teams, 8 teams, whatever. Really, I think it makes a huge difference because if you only have a small cluster of teams, and if we assume based on the Red Wings state, right, they've been losing, they haven't been in the playoffs in 10 years. I imagine if Dylan Larkin wants to be traded, he wants to be traded to somewhere that's going to win. And the problem is, like, those are not the teams that typically have the assets that, could you match the bar of an O'Reilly trade? You could probably squeak to it, but it's not going to be the one that like knocks the Red Wings socks off, and I think that's when you have 5 years on your deal, the Red Wings are going to have an incentive to make sure they get something that they like here. And I think the more that opens up, if you could get Utah, if you could get Anaheim into that conversation, all of a sudden, I think there's teams with assets. But if you're talking about Vegas, Dallas, Colorado, these teams that have already depleted their farm systems chasing it, it gets trickier.
Yeah, so let's get to the packages we kind of put together. And I'll start with Minnesota because Minnesota's been an often talked about team, a team desperate for a premier center. We had, I think, difficulty trying to construct a package that would make sense for both sides for two reasons. One is that Minnesota just made a similar type of trade for Quinn Hughes, moving several premium young players in that deal. And arguably their best young asset is a goaltender in Jesper Wallstedt. And Detroit's dealing with their own goalie situation there, where they're trying to figure out what to do with this whole Trey Augustine and Sebastian Cossa dynamic at the moment.
It's tricky, and that's like when I think of that one, it's like you got to get the best asset you can. So yeah, you have John Gibson, you have Cossa, Postava, Augustine, but if the best asset that you can get for Dylan Larkin turns out to be a goalie, you take the goalie and you figure out what other wheeling and dealing has to happen. So in ours, we sent Cossa back, I think as part of it to round out the proposal. He also came with a couple of young forwards, Danil Yurov and Charlie Stramel. And I think that would leave the Red Wings some decisions to make, obviously. But yeah, you could trade one to Florida. You could try to trade one to Edmonton, right? Like there are good teams that need goalies, Edmonton and Florida. I mean, Florida has the 9th pick, and they're another team that we actually talked about because they tend to be a place players like to go. But yeah, you wheel and deal from there. I think everything has to be about what's the best return you can get. If you hyper fixate on centers, well, there's not that many center prospects out there who are clearly better than what the Red Wings already have in Kasper and Danielson. I don't know how redundant you really need to get with a cluster there, Scott.
No, and excuse me because I haven't read this story, but did you guys consider Montreal in the equation?
No. So the teams that we went through to start, I think, are kind of the true contenders in desirable player states. So low tax states, warm weather,
right.
American markets. Not to say that I would love to play in Montreal, but I'm just saying they're not. Typically, you don't see a lot of Americans on a small list having the Canadian teams. Montreal will be another one. I mentioned Utah and Anaheim. If Montreal's in the mix, that's a really good thing for Detroit because Montreal has assets.
Well, and one of the things that came out of the Combine, not directly out of the Combine because Friedge wasn't there, was Friedge reporting on the Matthew Nyes deal that fell through post-deadline because they missed the deadline between the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and their willingness, by all accounts, to include a player like Alexander Zhuravsky, to include multiple first-round picks. There's Michael Hage there. There's David Reinbacher there. We know the need and desire after they played Oliver Kapanen at 2C for much of the year. We know that sort of finding a second center, not that Dylan Larkin is even a second line center, but finding a second center that can play with Nick Suzuki and change the outlook of that team. Like I think they're obviously the taxes are the taxes of it all, but from a pure hockey standpoint, from a opportunity to win standpoint, from a market, I mean, I think players love playing in Montreal. Montreal seems like a team that has the ammunition. Anaheim and Utah, to your point, would be in that same boat. They have the pieces to make that deal happen.
Yep.
But Montreal feels to me like it would be a more compelling destination if you're Dylan Larkin than Anaheim or Utah even.
When we were going through this piece, Max, I think when we got to Utah, we could see all the different ways they could make this work. I even think, despite how great Dylan Larkin is, an Olympian, premier play driving centerman, I think you would be really squeezing them to get either Dmitry Simashev or Caleb Denoye into that deal. I think you're probably talking about some combination of Tisha Ginla, Cole Beaudoin, Daniel Boot, Maverick Lamoureux. I know Utah has been trying. I don't know if it's been publicly reported, but I know over the years I've heard Barrett Hayton's name thrown around in trade deals. I think that's a reasonable name to come the other way to go center for center there. So that would make some sense to me. The one we got to that I thought was really
do you
interesting
value Corey? Just curious, do you value Desnoyers more than Iginla? Because I think I'm on the other side of that.
I think I would, and I think they would. They just picked him 4th overall a year ago as a center. I think they'd be that. I think they'd have a real hard time letting go.
They picked Teach 6th overall the year prior, and he's playing center.
Yeah. I don't think he's an NHL center though, but
I think Denoye would be just that's the one young center among the teams we evaluated that I was like, this is a path for Detroit to actually come out in a good spot from this. I did not leave those proposals feeling really good about the position the Red Wings were in.
The one that I was really intrigued by was Tampa Bay, because they don't have a lot of young premium assets, but they have two centers that had really good years. Connor Geekie was really good in the American League this year. He's one of the best young forwards, I thought, under 23 forwards in the American League. And then you have Sam O'Reilly, who just had a monster year in the OHL. I don't know if they're not premier pro assets like a Denoyer would be, but they're really good players. And I think, they're, like you said, Max was a little bit worried about redundancy, like how close are they to Casper and Danielson and something along those lines. But I feel like, Tampa has shown a lot of willingness to do what it takes to win in their window with Kucherov and Sorelli and Point and this window they have right now. I could see them put together a package with those guys that could be pretty desirable for Detroit. Maybe not the most desirable, but one that I think could make a lot of sense for them.
Scott, I want to start with your opinion on this just before we wrap here. Like, my big question in this is, like, is this salvageable in any way for Detroit to remain or try to get, like, they're trying to snap a 10-year playoff drought here and their number one center wants out. To me, I look at that and say, you're almost going to have to take a step back and retool. But is there a way to salvage this in your eyes?
I don't see a path forward. Like, we all love Moritz Seider. We all love Lucas Raymond. There just isn't. We all love Simon Edvinsson. I think Simon's a stud. I just don't know whether if you subtract Dylan Larkin and you're adding a young piece that's a couple years away, I don't know that the timeline any longer works with those guys. And I don't know that Red Wing, I mean, you know the market better than me, but are Red Wings fans even going to be prepared to hit a bit of it? Not that you have to go into a full-on rebuild. They've got tons of young pieces, but maybe they do. And are Red Wings fans even going to be able to put up with that, to put up with another 4 or 5 years? And if the answer is no, and the answer is to continue pursuing what they do have, maybe you're just kicking the can down the road of 3 or 4 years from now, having to make that difficult decision later than you should have. So I don't know. Like, it's almost impossible to win the trade in a player for player swap. Like, you're not getting an equivalent player to Dylan Larkin back. So if you're prioritizing youth pieces or Barrett Hayton and a youth piece, I don't know where that leaves them. Like, I just don't know how you pull out of that and how you sell it to Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond long term either.
How many years ago did Eichel get traded?
I think it was 2021.
So, I mean, that kind of took Buffalo from there till now, and it was a really frustrating time. And I know there was a lot of conversations of, like, Rasmus, this is dragging on guys like Dowling and stuff like that kind of thing. Like, are they ever going to win here? Is it ever going to be ever not going to be miserable? But it's not impossible either. It's just going to require extended patience from a group of fans that have already been extremely patient. And it's not my job to fire people, but suggest to me probably a management change at some point here along the in this time frame.
And there's no Martin Necas coming back, right? Like, that allowed the Mikko Rantanen decision to be salvageable, to be palpable if you're the Colorado Avalanche. Now, Rantanen's a better player than Larkin, but like that piece with the way that his no move clause, like, are you even getting a Logan Stankoven plus? Obviously, Caleb Desnoyers would, I think you'd consider a win operating out of where they're at. But
I think the two names, Corey, that we had in there that would fit the definition a little closer. One was Alexander Nikishin. I don't think he's as good as Larkin, but with the age and top 4D. The other was Thomas Harley. And it was maybe felt like a little bit of a stretch, but it gets cheaper for Dallas. Cap is really important to Dallas, so it makes their cap sheet better. He's coming off the down year. Like, Dylan Larkin counts almost $2 million less against the cap than Harley. And if you had a blue line of Harley, Seider, Edvinsson, and Axel Sandin Pellikka, all of those guys 25 or younger, maybe that's your path forward. You're building around a really strong blue line, and you're still obviously dying for centers. But
you've got the goalies
reminds me of the old Nashville teams with the really good blue lines. Like, when you look at this way they've built here, Max, like, I don't think maybe I'm being too nice. I don't think you can look at this team and say they've made like some really glaring blunders as a management group, like some absolutely terrible signings, terrible trades, terrible draft picks. I'm not saying their record's perfect by any means. I think they get hampered a little bit by something like the Philip Zadina happening the year before this management group came in. But like, I don't know, how do you assess where things stand for Detroit and how they kind of designed this build up until this situation?
I think their mistakes are mistakes of kind of cautiousness and conservativeness, right? Like you're right that there's not some massive money deal that's become an anchor or some massive miss on a draft pick where the guy's not even going to play NHL games. There's draft picks you can revisit, like the Kosa pick at 15. Like if they had taken Wallstedt, they're in a better spot, right? Or if, obviously everyone looks to look at Wyatt Johnston. But I think even just compare the goalies, right? If they had taken Wallstedt, that could have aged better. You can debate the Danielson pick. I know there was a lot of people in the market that preferred Zach Benson. Certainly today, that looks like Zach Benson would have been a better pick. The Red Wings also have long needed centers, and I think taking the 6'2" skilled center who can skate was a defensible pick at the time, even if it's not going to age into being the correct answer. But it still could. Nate Danielson's not that old. He's going to be 22 next year. Those to me, but I think their mistakes are mistakes more of conservatism. The Jake Wallman trade, attaching a second round pick to him only to see him get traded for a first, that stands out. They let Shane Gostisbehere walk. They gave out some contracts to Justin Hall and but these are things that I think almost every NHL team does. Every NHL team can list a few contracts like that they maybe wish they hadn't get away or given out. A couple guys they wish hadn't let get away, stuff like that. I don't disagree with you, Corey, that there hasn't been any catastrophes here, but there haven't really been any home runs. And I think especially when you look outside the first round of the draft, Emmett Finney and Albert Johansson are the only players they found, and those aren't impact guys necessarily.
Yeah, you look at some of their divisional rivals. There's no Drake Batherson that they've got in. Never mind like a Lane Hudson type, or go to Buffalo getting Samuelson in the second round, or that's
Peterka who became Doan.
That's the kind of the things they've been lacking. And that's why I think this is so tough, right? Because it doesn't feel like this has been incompetent management or a poorly executed rebuild. They've just really lacked that one or two moves, really just one or two, I feel like, that could have put them over the top.
They also didn't get the lottery luck. It just never bounced.
It's
their
true,
way.
but I don't think in those years, in the years where they were really bad, they should have picked first overall in 2020, but they came out of that draft with Lucas Raymond, and if they were first overall, they might have come out of it with Alexis Lafreniere.
Yeah.
They might have been in a better spot because of that. They dropped in 2019. They got Moritz Seider. Seider's probably going 2 in a redraft of that year. So they didn't get the luck, but I don't actually think the luck is what killed them, outside of not getting lucky in 23 and moving up to get, Bedard or whatever. But anyway, a lot to unpack there. I'm sure we'll talk more about this. Scott, you've got a mock draft coming out on Tuesday, so make sure everyone keep your eyes peeled for that. But that is going to do it for us today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series. Be back with you soon. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell to stay informed and catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And in the meantime, you can join our Discord community. We'll see you there.